Hello everyone, and welcome to this fireside chat webcast as part of the BNext cohort certification on diversity and inclusion, overcoming unconscious bias. My name is Maya Jenkins, and I'm part of the team here at People Matters BNext. Really excited to be joined here today by Dr. Sondra Thiedemann. We've had the privilege of learning from Sondra on our last D&I Overcoming Unconscious Bias course, which took place earlier this year. And Dr. Thiedemann is one of the leading experts on workplace diversity, on cross-cultural business, and bias reduction. As president of Cross-Cultural Communications, Sondra has over 25 years experience as a speaker, a trainer, and an author, helping professionals in Fortune 500 companies, public sector organizations, and dozens of associations to find ways to successfully navigate our increasingly diverse workplaces. She's also the author of 4 books, including 3 Keys and most recently, Making Diversity Work, 7 Steps for Defeating Bias in the Workplace. Welcome back, Sondra. We're really excited to have you joining us for this webcast.
Thanks, Maya. Great to be back. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you. So I'll just get started with the questions here for you. And so this first one I have is, how do we discover our unconscious biases and overcome them?
That's a big question, but oddly enough, there's a fairly straightforward answer to it. And it's a matter of taking things a step at a time. Now, this answer, I'll admit, it may not apply to the most deeply rooted kinds of biases that are supported by the culture as a whole, that grow out of trauma and the like, but it does apply to the biases that most of us people have. So let's start with the first part of your question. How can we be aware of them? Well, there's 2 ways. One, take a look at your past decisions. Think about, particularly as a leader, who do you hire? Who do you promote? What does your workforce look like? Who are your friends? Who do you hang out with? What other decisions have you made that relate to other human beings? Do you discover that you're preferring people from particular groups or of a particular age or particular sexual orientation? Does it have anything to do with even where you live? Just watch all those decisions that you've made in the past, particularly with respect to the workplace when it comes to hiring and promoting. And a second way, and look to see if there's any patterns there. So that's the first way. Second way is more in the moment. When you encounter someone who's different from yourself in some way, I don't care whether it's skin color or language or dialect or country of origin or height or gender or whatever, what is the first assumption that comes to mind about what characteristics they might have? What's the first thing that your mind goes to? Oh, I'll bet they're good at mathematics. Oh, I'll bet they're a good worker. Oh, I'll bet that they're a criminal. I better be careful. What is it that comes into your mind? That first thought is possibly a red flag that could reflect a bias that's lurking underneath you. Once you get that kind of awareness about your past decisions and patterns, those first thoughts and assumptions, then you can begin this journey of fixing them. And just very briefly, most of that fixing is actually in the moment. And that involves, number one, pausing before you make a decision. If you noticed that you've had these generalities, general assumptions in the past, or these first thoughts about what people were like because of the group they belong to, wake up. And the next time you're in that position, pause. I don't know whether it's 30 seconds or a walk around the block or sleep on a hiring decision. Give your mind time to move from the emotional and the irrational, which is what that bias is, to the rational part of the brain. This is physiological. This has to do with the neurons in the brain and pathways. That pausing can give you the opportunity to be the best person you can be. Secondly, when you get a sense of what your biases are, apply logic to them. Ask yourself the question, how many people do I really know who conform to this generality? How many? In reality, there's not going to be that many. Because often we learn our biases through the media or one encounter or some rumor that we've heard about a group or a movie we watched even. Ask yourself logically, how many do I really know? And secondly, how reliable was the source? So did you learn it from a parent who you knew to be biased or racist or sexist? Did you learn it from a teacher that really wasn't that clear in their thinking about diversity and inclusion? Ask yourself those questions. And finally, maybe we can go into this a little bit later in the interview. Focus on what we have in common with people. Human beings share so much more than they don't share. We have shared values, we have shared desires, we have things that we are interested in. So begin to reach out to people who are different from yourself and be open to finding what you have in common. There's lots of reasons psychologically, while identifying that commonality can help you defeat your bias. So that gives you just a real quick overview of what you can do to become aware and what you can do to do something about it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I remember from the first iteration of the program, that was one of the things I really that I took from it personally, was the idea that there's a lot you can do just on your own on an individual level to really overcome these unconscious biases. And it really involves a lot of sometimes uncomfortable but necessary self-reflection. So that's wonderful. Thank you. So this is, again, something we explore more deeply on the program itself, but how can we help our managers to foster a culture of trust and safety and equal voice?
Give this question some serious thought, and I came up with a whole bunch of bullets. And then I thought, no, there's really just a couple of things that are the things that matter the most. The first one is your managers need, as Maya's just pointed out, to have the courage to be self-aware and to be transparent about their own foibles. I'm thinking back to an experience I had with the chief executive officer of a giant organization based in the US, but a global organization. And he had an experience in which his bias showed. And he stood in front of all of his managers, all of his team, and talked about it. And that had a ripple effect throughout the organization. And whether it be a manager in a department or whether it be a leader of a whole organization, that genuine modeling of what he or she wants from the rest of the team is invaluable. And it's demonstrating courage, which is, again, as Maya alluded to, what all this is about. And a second thing, though, model as a leader genuine inclusiveness. And that means make it clear that this isn't about quotas. This isn't about seeing to it that you hire X number of a particular group by X number of a date. That is non-inclusive. It's not that you don't want that. It's not that you don't want that diversity. But when it goes down to numbers, we start to lose support. It's about humans. It's about finding that we want the best people to work here. And we don't want any barriers to hiring, like the biases I mentioned before about maybe having a hiring bias yourself. So keep emphasizing, we want the very best people. It's not about quotas. That's going to model inclusiveness for everyone else. Never lower your standards when hiring. Make it clear that you're not doing that. And finally, enforce respect among your teams. Don't let things go. When there's a joke told that's disrespectful, even if the member of the group about which the joke is told isn't there, do something about it. Sit down with that person and talk to them. I don't mean humiliate them. I don't mean exclude them. I don't mean within certain limits fire them, depending upon how bad it is. But sit down and have there be a conversation and possibly a consequence. But if you start to let that stuff go, it's kind of sending the message we don't really care. So again, be transparent, model inclusiveness, and enforce respect within the organization.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, couldn't agree more. So my next question here for you is, in the program we explore the watch, think, act model as a way to overcome unconscious biases. And we've talked a little bit about that so far, but maybe you could tell us a little more about these 3 steps and how we can use them and some examples maybe.
Sure. I kind of love this watch, think, act model, and I'll tell you why. Because it's tangible and specific and immediate. Okay. Now, we've already talked about the watch in these questions because we're talking about watching our past decisions and watching our first assumptions about a group different from themselves. So that's obvious. We've talked a little bit about the think issue, which is exploring the logic and the reliability of that bias. How many people do you know? Was the source of the bias reliable? But we didn't talk about the act part. And okay, I realize that this may sound simplistic. There are situations in which it is, but most of the time, acting as if your bias does not exist can have an influence both on the atmosphere in which you work and on your bias yourself. So I'm going to explore this to you by giving you an example. So there's a woman. I'm going to name her Miranda, just to name her something. This woman is a manager. She has a bias of which she is aware that people who don't speak her language with the skill that she does, including grammar and pronunciation, are somehow lacking in intelligence or creativity or some other good quality. It's as if Miranda's mother was an English teacher or the language that you speak, was a Mandarin teacher who really, really understood the language and would pick at her about using the wrong grammatical term. And this has happened to all of us. So this woman, Miranda, has this bias. She knows she has it because of the kinds of things we've been talking about. And she has worked really hard to rid herself of it. But darn it, she just can't seem to do it. She's tried the logic. She's tried the pausing. She's tried the building commonality that we talked about. But it still pops up all the time. So what happens is she goes to meetings or she facilitates meetings of her team, and there are people in the meeting that do not speak the language that is the dominant language in the organization with the skill level that she wants, and she still catches herself judging them for it. So ACT involves 1, making the decision that you're basically going to fake it till you make it. And the first step for Miranda is, what behaviors, observable and measurable, am I, Miranda, doing that are the manifestation of my bias that people who have language skills different than mine are in other ways inadequate? So let's say, for example, that Miranda does not call on those people when they raise their hands in the meeting because she'll quit. She just doesn't even think she's doing. She'll go, oh yeah, what about you? Would you have something to say? Or what about you? But she doesn't go after the people who communicate differently than she would have them communicate because this bias is sitting there going, they don't have that much really to say. Even when they do talk, she doesn't really listen. We've all experienced this. You pretend you're listening, you even think you're listening, but you're not really listening, right? So those 2 behaviors, she doesn't call on them. And if they do speak, she's not really taking in what they're saying. So Miranda identifies those 2 behaviors, those external behaviors, okay? And she says, okay, now I, Miranda, I'm going to fake it for, let's make it a month. Let's say she's got a meeting every Monday morning with these people. And for 4 Mondays, she is going to fake calling on people and listening. So what does that mean? Calling on. She gets around that by having an agenda, right? And a program. It's Nancy's turn to speak. It's Juan's turn to speak. It's somebody, Ling's time to speak. It's one by one. Let's go around the table and everybody speaks. So she's not She has to listen to them. She doesn't have any choice. Okay. Now, the listening piece. You may think that that's internal, therefore not observable or measurable by her or people observing her. Well, a corollary of her listening commitment is to take notes. So she must call upon the person and take notes on what they're saying, external, observable, and she must ask at least one follow-up question. And you can't ask a follow-up question if you haven't really been listening. So she's identified this bias. She's identified the behaviors that she does that the bias creates. She's identified counter-bias behaviors and committed to do them, these two things, this calling on and this listening, for a month. As she does that, she also needs to notice what these people are saying. Notice it. Look at the notes. Think about it. And the odds are overwhelming that a lot of what they say is going to have value. And that very fact that that evidence is being put into her face because she wants to beat it. She's not a bad person. She wants to get rid of it. It can begin to erode the bias that she has. And it's a little bit like, it's subtle and it's gradual. Like when you catch a cold, have you ever noticed often we have this cough that lingers after the cold, right? And it goes on and on and on. And you think, I'm just the coughing person. I'm going to be coughing forever, right? And so poor Miranda's thinking, I'm this biased person. It's going to go on forever. But one day you wake up and you weren't coughing anymore. And you go, where'd it go? That's the kind of thing that can happen with this. So watch the first thought to become aware of it. Look at your past decisions. Think about the logic and act. Fake it. And you'll be amazed in a lot of cases that the bias begins to fade.
Wonderful. Yeah, I love this idea that even faking it till you make it can lead to a real authentic change. And it's almost like a habit building, isn't it? That it's this subtle, gradual process, and it's something that you really have to commit to. But it's key that we notice and we take action and we commit to that action.
Exactly. And it goes back to Aristotle, who talked a lot, attitude follows behavior. It's a fundamental principle of human thinking that I think it serves us in a lot of aspects of our lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. Once you've made that decision, it's
yes. Now you need to want to fix it and you need to be aware of it. But once that's there, it's good. Yeah.
The intention. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you for that. So I was wondering if you could tell us a story where you realized about an unconscious bias you had that was blocking your way to being inclusive, and how did you find out? How did you watch out for this?
The one that sticks in my mind, and it's so painful, we don't want to look at these things, right? And people like me that make my living talking about this, we don't want to look at these things. But I'm really glad that this happened, and I'm really glad I was able to, because it taught me, and then I hope I can teach others through it. Midway in my career, I was doing a lot of consulting on the global stage, and that meant often that I was interacting with client contacts here within the United States who were from other cultures and other parts of the world. They weren't living here, but they were visiting. And I remember one day being on a one of those dinner cruises on Lake Michigan, Chicago, and it was a very diverse group of people that had come primarily from Asia. And I was standing on one of the decks talking to this gentleman. Now, this gentleman, I can't recall for sure, but I think he was from Japan. I'm pretty sure. And we were talking, and I'm a kind of a person that generally is comfortable with new people. That's not a thing, luckily. There's things I'm uncomfortable with, but that's not one of them. And I was talking to him for a while, and I was so uncomfortable. He was lovely. and I was uncomfortable. And I got to thinking, what's going on? Here I deal in cross-cultural. It's not this guy. Forget him. He's got nothing to do with it. All he is from Japan. That's all. I was struggling a little bit to understand his accent, but he spoke good English and we were doing okay that way. And I finally, conversation wound down and I left and I was relieved not to be talking to him anymore. But it got me thinking, why is it that I was perfectly comfortable with the people from Norway? I was perfectly comfortable with the people from the Latin countries. What is going on, Theaterman? I asked myself, and I said, I think you have a bias going here. And the bias that I isolated was a broad one. It was this thing that we grew up with in the Western world, and maybe particularly in the US, that the cultures of the East, meaning primarily China, Japan, Vietnam, primarily, not South Asia so much, primarily what we think of as Asia, and that those cultures are so different from what goes on in North America that it's not that we can't get along, but we just can't understand each other, that we're so different that we can't connect. I think that's a good way to put it. I realized that I was carrying that this was a nice man, but he's so different from me that we're not going to really be able to connect. Therefore, I wasn't really trying, and I wasn't really seeing the connections as they happened. So my next step in the process I teach other people is, okay, I've got this awareness of this darn attitude that's silly. But where did it come from? Why? And I thought back to my childhood, and man, there it was. I grew up in Hollywood, California. I grew up with nice parents, good people, not particularly worldly, but good people. The neighborhood had a little diversity, but not much. And I grew up with my mother and father and my sister, who was 18 months older than I. Now, let me describe exactly where I lived, and you can probably picture this. No matter what part of the world you're from, you know that image of the Hollywood sign on the hills above Hollywood. I know you've seen it.
Yeah.
I lived right below that sign.
Wow.
Yes. And I lived on a street. I know you can't really see my hands. There was a street that ran basically up the hill from famous Hollywood and Vine. And it went up the hill and approached that sign. I lived on a little street that ran perpendicular to that main street. There was a memory I've got from my child that happened over and over and over again. I was about 10, my sister a little bit older than I. There was a man that used to come into our neighborhood roughly once a month. And he would come up from what we call the Hollywood Flats, up that hill from roughly Hollywood and Vine. And he was a street vendor, an old-fashioned street vendor. And he had a cart, a manual cart. And he would push it up the street, and he had a street cry. And he was Chinese. And that cry would be in English, but with a strong Mandarin or Cantonese accent, I don't know which. And my sister and I would hear him coming because of the street cry. And it's so interesting, everybody. I've told this story dozens of times, and I can picture him right this minute. I can see him. And he comes up, and he would turn the corner to come up our street, all right? And my sister and I would be playing. It was a tiny little street, playing in the street further up, and watch him come and hear his street cry. And he would turn, and this is what in my memory I saw. I see a man with long silk robes, bright blue and shiny, sort of like in a movie. And I see a long gray beard, like in a movie, like a stereotype. And I see in my image long nails, long curly nails. You see what I did with my memory? Long curly nails that were actually sort of yellow. All right. You'll see how silly that is in a minute. And here, so this is the image, my memory. And so he would come up the street, and my sister and I, we knew he wasn't really scary, but we were little girls, and in mock terror, we would jump up and down and we would squeal and we would run into the back of the house to hide. Okay. Now he wasn't really scary, but we did that. That's what we did. So when I became aware, one, of this bias, and two, I connected it to that man, I went to my sister, and she's older than I. So I said, Susie, I said, did he exist? I remember. Two, did he have long, curly, yellow nails? And she couldn't stop laughing at me. She said, no, Sandra. Yeah, he had a rope, but he didn't have a long beard and he didn't have long orange nails that curl. How could he? He was a knife sharpener. He couldn't possibly have had those nails. So that story and that awareness was valuable to me because I know it instinctively. That's where that bias came from. That not so much even the man, more the memory of the man and what I manifested through the years. And it wasn't countered by anything later on. I didn't, for example, I didn't know a bunch of people, foreign Asian students when I went to the university. I did hang out with them. There weren't a bunch of other people in the neighborhood. There wasn't anything to kind of counter that made me have those personal experiences. So that's my story. I'm sure there's more, but that's the one that really stuck in my mind as one of my biases.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's so interesting that just an incident from our very, very far past in our childhoods can have such a ripple effect into our futures, and often from silly incidents or in seemingly inconsequential things that really solidify and create all kinds of issues for us in the present in terms of bias.
And I think it's that was a good comment, because I'm thinking that's an extra reason how important it is for us to have contact with people who are different and to look for the commonalities that I mentioned earlier, because if I'd had that, those would have eroded this one experience, So
So moving a little bit to business here, what are some business outcomes that can be expected from undergoing this transformational journey of overcoming unconscious bias?
Well, so many things pertain to business. I mean, there's, for example, within the continental U.S., there's a lot of studies that have been done about the fact that a fairly high percentage of the North American population will do business with a company that is socially responsible and that is showing, for example, inclusion and diversity efforts and genuinely pursuing it in an honest, organic way. So the customer piece is there. I mean, I've got stories about clients I've had that actually lost substantial business. I'm thinking of a commercial real estate example right now where they lost a major deal because there were not females on the sales team. And it meant something to the potential buyer to have females on the sales team. And we're talking millions of dollars here. So there's that very straightforward issue. But I also think that as leaders work toward becoming personally bias-free and making inclusion and diversity efforts in their organization, you're going to be building better teams. That's all there is to it, because people are going to get along better. They're going to understand each other better, and therefore those teams are going to be be more productive, and you're going to have better relationships. But the big one for me, I mean, the huge thing that I just think is so proven, it's not even a soft thing, innovation. That's it. There are studies done by the dozens, showing that if you as a leader make the effort to create a truly inclusive workplace, it means that you are going to be hiring and retaining team members of diverse backgrounds. And whether those backgrounds be from different countries or different ethnicities or different ages or gender, whatever it is, those individuals are bringing a different point of view to your problems and a different way of communicating to your problems. And what that's going to mean is that you're going to have problem-solving teams that are diverse. And I'm stumbling a little because I'm trying to make it clear that they don't need to have different skin color necessarily. It could be Maya and I could have a different upbringing. We look very much alike in terms of our coloring, except that my hair is not natural, but I'm sure hers is. But that different parts of the country, different life experiences where ages are different and all of that. And here's what happens. Here's what happens when you created this environment that attracts and retains people who think differently. You're going to end up with better ideas. Why? Because when you have people who think differently, there often is created not only a variety of ideas coming into the pot, but also tension, creative tension. Fascinating to me. To me, that's more interesting than just the fact that they're bringing different ideas. Here's what happens, and I'm thinking back to a situation I was in. You have a team of people that are largely alike, right? They can communicate well. Maya and I, our language works. We talk, easily together. I understand what she's saying. She understands what I'm saying. There's no concepts I'm using that she doesn't get. She's understanding the answers to my questions here, and I'm understanding her question, what she's getting at. If we had a different background, that might not be the case. And what would that mean? That would mean that I would have to work harder to understand her, what she meant. I'm not just talking an accent here. I would have to think, wait a minute, what she mean? What should I ask her? I need to ask a question that I might not have had to ask. If she pushes back on my idea, because I'm different than her, right? And so her perspective's different, so I need to defend it. And I'm then going to need to defend my idea more thoroughly than I would have had she just said, oh, great, Sandra, that's great. And therefore, I'm going to have to explore it for its validity and its practicality and all the rest of it. And she is too. And we're going to end up with better solutions to the problem. That's it. Yeah. And that to me is almost, other than that it's the right thing to do, the biggest reason why all this matters to you becoming an effective leader.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such an important point to make, that innovation is not just about lots of great ideas being in one room at the same time, but those ideas existing in opposition sometimes, and that tension, and that really being where innovation can thrive as well. And it's not always easy. It's not just people sitting in a room agreeing, oh, that's brilliant, fantastic, but like really challenging each other's ideas as well is where true solutions and really creative problem solving can exist. So
plus, doesn't it sound like more fun?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we all need to have our ideas challenged sometimes. We may not like it in the moment, but in retrospect, it's always more valuable, I think.
Right.
Yeah. So that actually leads me into my next question quite nicely. So we've had you join us for one of our cohort programs. Previously, we were lucky enough to have you before. So as you probably remember, we have a huge range of learners joining from across the world. It's very global, from a vast cross-section of different industries and professions. And I just wanted to ask, what do you think cohort-based courses like BeNext, how do these accelerate or enable us to overcome unconscious biases? And what way does this particular format serve some of the things we've been talking about today?
It's almost as if you've designed the perfect format to begin the process of healing biases, because the very fact that these learners are from these very different places, lifestyles, points of view, and are listening to a common facilitator, right there, you are bringing together people who are different under a common experience, which is one of the important principles of defeating bias, because they're at that moment, they're not looking at each other virtually, in this case, as, oh, so different from me. Oh, they just asked the question I was going to ask, or they're a little confused by the same thing I'm confused by, or that person's from a whole other world and their problem's the same as mine. Right there, you're getting into the commonality that helps create a sense of oneness And within that sense of oneness is where biases can begin to be defeated. And then also the second reason that that's so valuable, the format that you have, is that people begin to see each other as individual people, not just as, oh, those are the people from Australia, right? That they're individual different personalities, which automatically breaks down bias, because the bias is this inflexible generality about a whole bunch of people. I mean, the only thing that would make it better is if you all could be hanging together in some lovely convention center in Singapore or something. That's not happening. So, but very valuable what you're doing in addition to the knowledge that you're imparting.
Yeah. I think that's one of the wonderful things we found about Be Next is that commonality in the sense of going through a journey together wherever you are in the world and just encountering perspectives that you maybe wouldn't find anywhere else. So thank you for that. And my last question for you here today, Sondra, is what is your advice for leaders embarking on this journey of transformation?
When I was jotting down answers, and I've got some little bullets here that I'm struggling to read my handwriting on, but the big one that I've written here is courageous. Be courageous. Try things that someone else may say, that's not such a good idea. Well, really think about it. Is it right for your organization? It's one thing to benchmark, and that's important to get a handle on what's going on with other organizations similar to yours. Absolutely. At the exact same moment, also look at your own specific culture and don't feel that you have to go along with what's happening with everyone else. I've seen organizations miss opportunities when they've got some really unique culture that really would respond to something very innovative, but they go, no, I'm scared to try something different than what everyone else is doing. So be courageous, and don't focus on this. Remember, this is a human thing. It's almost like you want one of those posters we put on our walls, right? This is a human thing. This isn't about one specific group. This isn't about politics. This isn't about, quotas and all the rest of it. Keep your eye on the ball, that we're all different in some ways, alike in others. And isn't that wonderful? And set that tone. So the courage to study, but be unique, and the wisdom to recognize basically that as different as we are, we're all in this together, and to set that tone within your organization and watch that principle as it runs through your various initiatives.
Lovely. Thank you so much. That's great advice. Great advice. And thank you so much again for joining us here today, Sondra. We're so excited to have you joining us for the Be Next cohort certification.
It'll be fun. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, really excited. And that'll be starting in August. And we'll post more information in the links below for you to find out more about the program and to enroll. But until then, we thank you again, Sondra, for joining us and for this great chat today. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.